The wind howled off the Atlantic, carrying the sharp scent of salt and seaweed. As Eleanor stood on the weathered porch of the beach house, her silver hair whipped against her face, but she didn't bother to tuck it back. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, a restless gray expanse that mirrored the turmoil in her heart. This house, with its creaking floorboards and sun-faded shutters, had been her sanctuary for decades. It was where she'd raised her son, Daniel, where she'd taught her grandchildren, Lily and Max, to build sandcastles and chase crabs. But now, it felt like a ghost of itself, hollowed out by absence. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the letter in her pocket, its edges worn from days of unfolding and rereading. The words were seared into her mind. Mom, I'm sorry, but Sarah says it's best if you don't come for Christmas this year. It's just too much right now. Daniel's handwriting, usually so steady, had wavered, as if he'd hesitated before signing his name. Sarah, her daughter-in-law, had drawn a line in the sand, and Eleanor was on the wrong side of it. She hadn't seen it coming. Not really. There had been tension, of course, small slights that piled up over the years. Sarah's clipped tone when Eleanor offered parenting advice, the way she'd bristle when Eleanor brought over homemade cookies for the kids, claiming they had too much sugar. Eleanor had tried to adapt, to soften her edges, to be the mother-in-law Sarah might tolerate. But the ban on Christmas, a holiday Eleanor had always hosted, filling the beach house with laughter, tinsel, and the smell of roasting chestnuts felt like a betrayal too deep to forgive. She turned back to the house, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of the wraparound porch, the windows that framed the sea like a painting. This was where Lily, now 10, had learned to read, curled up on the wicker sofa with Eleanor's old copy of The Secret Garden, where Max, 7, had proudly presented her with a lopsided seashell necklace, his small hands sticky with salt water. The memories were so vivid they hurt, each one a reminder of what she'd lost. Sarah's decision wasn't just about one holiday. It was a wall, cutting Eleanor off from the only family she had left. Her husband, Tom, had passed 5 years ago, leaving her with this house and a quiet life she'd learned to cherish. Daniel was her only child, and after Tom's death, the grandkids had become her tether to joy. She'd spent every summer here with them, teaching them to swim, telling stories of her own childhood by the fire pit. The beach house wasn't just a place. It was a vessel for their bond, a sacred space where time seemed to pause. But Sarah had never loved it the way Daniel did. She'd called it dated and impractical, wrinkling her nose at the chipped paint and uneven floors. Eleanor had ignored the comments, assuming they were just differences in taste. Now, she saw them for what they were, a prelude to this exile. The letter had arrived a week ago, but the hurt had been brewing longer. It started last spring, when Sarah began pulling the kids away from Eleanor's invitations. Playdates were canceled, phone calls went unanswered, and summer at the beach house, a tradition since Lily was born, never happened. Eleanor had chalked it up to Sarah's stress, maybe a rough patch in her marriage to Daniel. But the Christmas ban was different. It was deliberate, a message that Eleanor was no longer welcome in their lives. She walked inside, the floor creaking under her steps, and sat at the kitchen table. The room was unchanged since Tom's time, the same oak table, the same mismatched chairs, the same view of the dunes. She pulled out the letter again, smoothing it flat. Daniel hadn't fought for her. That was the part that stung most. Her son, the boy she'd raised to stand up for what mattered, had let Sarah dictate this fracture. Eleanor's chest tightened, a mix of anger and grief. She wasn't perfect, she'd been too outspoken at times, too stubborn, but she didn't deserve this. The phone rang, shattering the silence. She glanced at the screen. Daniel. Her heart leapt, then sank. She let it ring, her hands trembling. What could he say now? That he was sorry. That Sarah had changed her mind. Or worse, that he was calling to justify it. The voicemail chime sounded, but she didn't listen. Instead, she stood and walked to the window, staring at the ocean. The waves crashed relentlessly, each one erasing the last, and she felt a strange clarity settle over her. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to wait for scraps of affection from a family that had pushed her out. The beach house, this place of love and loss, was hers to decide. And in that moment, an idea took root not out of spite, but out of a need to reclaim her own story. She would sell it. The house that Sarah had never appreciated, that Daniel had let slip away, that Lily and Max would no longer visit. She would let it go, just as they had let her go. Eleanor picked up her phone and dialed her realtor, Margaret, a friend from her book club who'd been in the business for decades. "Margaret," she said when the call connected, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I want to put the beach house on the market." There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice, gentle but surprised. "Eleanor, are you sure? That place is your heart." "It was," Eleanor said, her eyes on the horizon. "But not anymore." As she hung up, the weight of her decision settled over her. Selling the house wouldn't erase the pain, but it would be a step toward something new. She didn't know what yet, maybe a smaller place. Maybe a trip somewhere she'd never been. But for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of power, a sense that she could still shape her own future, even if her family had turned away. The next morning, Margaret arrived with her clipboard and camera, ready to list the property. She walked through the house, noting its quirks with affection: the clawfoot tub, the stained glass window in the attic, the porch swing that squeaked in the wind. "This place has soul," Margaret said, snapping photos. "It'll sell fast." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. She didn't trust herself to speak. As Margaret worked, Eleanor wandered to the backyard, where the fire pit still held ashes from last summer's marshmallow roasts. She could almost hear Lily's giggle, Max's excited chatter. The memories were so close, yet so untouchable. She wondered if the kids even knew about Sarah's decision, if they missed her as much as she missed them. By noon, the listing was live. Eleanor sat on the porch, watching the waves, her phone buzzing with notifications she ignored. She didn't need to see the photos or read the description. She knew every inch of this house, every story it held. Selling it felt like cutting out a piece of her heart, but keeping it felt like clinging to a past that no longer existed. That evening, Daniel called again. This time, she answered, her voice calm but distant. "Mom," he said, his tone heavy with guilt. "I heard about the house. Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor looked out at the darkening sea. "You didn't tell me about Christmas," she said simply. There was no anger in her voice, only truth. And in the silence that followed, she knew this was only the beginning of a reckoning they'd both have to face. The days after listing the beach house blurred into a strange rhythm of waiting and remembering. Eleanor woke each morning to the sound of the ocean, its relentless pulse a reminder that time moved forward, even when her heart felt stuck. The house, once alive with the chaos of family, now echoed with her solitary footsteps. She avoided the rooms where memories lingered most: the kids' bedroom with its bunk beds, the kitchen where she'd taught Lily to bake. Instead, she busied herself with packing, sorting through decades of keepsakes: Tom's old fishing hat, a photo album from Daniel's childhood, a drawing Max had made of the beach house, its roof lopsided but bursting with crayon color. Margaret called daily with updates. The listing had drawn interest immediately, families looking for a summer retreat, retirees dreaming of coastal sunsets. Eleanor listened, nodding, but her thoughts drifted. She wasn't ready to imagine strangers walking these floors, erasing the traces of her life here. Yet the alternative, keeping the house, hoping for a reconciliation that might never come, felt like a heavier burden. She'd made her choice, and she would see it through. One afternoon, as she sorted through a box of Christmas decorations, her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Can we talk? I'm coming to the beach house tomorrow." Eleanor stared at the message, her heart caught between hope and dread. She typed a curt okay and set the phone down, her hands trembling. What did he want? To apologize? To argue? Or to finally explain why he'd let Sarah build this wall between them? She spent the evening cleaning, as if tidying the house could prepare her for whatever Daniel might bring. She scrubbed the counters, swept the porch, and dusted the shelves, each task a way to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. By the time she went to bed, the house gleamed, but her chest felt heavy with unspoken words. Daniel arrived the next morning, his SUV pulling into the gravel driveway just as the sun broke through the clouds. Eleanor watched from the porch, her arms crossed. As he stepped out, he looked older than she remembered, his dark hair flecked with gray, his shoulders slouched under an invisible weight. He carried a small bag, as if he planned to stay, and the sight of it stirred something in Eleanor. Hope, maybe, or just the ache of familiarity. "Mom," he said, climbing the porch steps. His voice was soft, almost pleading. "Can we sit?" She nodded, leading him to the wicker chairs overlooking the sea. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the distant crash of waves. Eleanor waited, letting him speak first. She'd spent too many years filling the gaps in their conversations, smoothing over tensions. This time, he would have to start. "I didn't know it would come to this," Daniel said finally, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The house. I mean, I didn't think you'd sell it." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "And I didn't think you'd let Sarah keep me from my grandkids," she replied, her voice steady but sharp. "But here we are." Daniel flinched, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "It's not that simple, Mom. Sarah's been overwhelmed. The kids, her job, everything. She thought a smaller Christmas would be easier." "Easier for who?" Eleanor asked, turning to face him. "Not for Lily and Max. Not for me. And not for you." From the look on your face. He didn't answer right away, and in his silence, Eleanor saw the truth. He was torn, caught between his wife and his mother, and he'd chosen the path of least resistance. It wasn't just Sarah's decision. It was his too, in all the ways he hadn't fought it. "I should have pushed back," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But Sarah, she's so sure of what's best for the kids. And I didn't want to make things worse." Eleanor's heart ached at his words, not just for herself, but for him. She remembered the boy he'd been, fearless and curious, always running to her with questions or stories. Now, he seemed smaller, diminished by a marriage that demanded he bend. She wanted to reach out, to tell him she understood, but the hurt was still too raw. "So you let her erase me," she said, her voice breaking. "You let her take away the one thing that kept us close, Christmas here, with the kids, in this house." Daniel's eyes glistened, and he looked away. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that. I thought we'd figure it out after the holidays. That things would go back to normal." "Normal?" Eleanor laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even her. "Normal was Lily and Max running through this house, leaving sand everywhere. Normal was you helping me string lights on the porch, Normal was family. Daniel. And you let that go. He didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at the sea. And Eleanor felt the weight of their shared history pressing down. She wanted to shake him, to make him see what he'd cost her. But she also wanted to pull him close, to forgive him. Instead, she stood and walked to the edge of the porch, needing the space to breathe. "I'm selling the house because it's not mine anymore," she said, her back to him. "Not without you all. It's just a shell now, and I can't live in a shell." Daniel stood too, his voice urgent. "Mom, don't do this. The kids love this place. I love it. We can fix this." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "Can we? Because I don't know if I can trust you to fight for me." The words hung between them, sharp and final. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but his phone buzzed, cutting through the moment. He glanced at it, his face tightening, and Eleanor knew it was Sarah. He didn't answer, but the interruption was enough to break the fragile connection they'd started to rebuild. "I have to go," he said, his voice heavy. "But I'll come back. We'll talk more. Please, Mom, don't sign anything yet." She didn't respond, just watched as he walked back to his car, his shoulders hunched. As his SUV disappeared down the road, Eleanor felt a strange mix of relief and loneliness. She'd said what she needed to say, but it hadn't filled the hole in her heart. If anything, it had made it clearer this wasn't just about Sarah, or even Daniel. It was about her, and what she was willing to hold on to or let go. That night, she sat by the fire pit, the flames casting shadows on the sand. She thought of Lily and Max, wondering if they'd ever understand why she'd done this. She thought of Tom, who'd loved this house as much as she did, and wondered what he'd say. And she thought of herself, a woman who'd spent her life building a home for others, now faced with building one for herself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of showings and offers. Margaret brought prospective buyers through the beach house, their voices echoing through the halls as they admired the view or debated paint colors. Eleanor stayed out of the way, taking long walks along the shore, her boots sinking into the damp sand. Each step felt like a farewell, not just to the house, but to the life she'd built here. She didn't regret her decision, but she couldn't deny the grief that came with it. One morning, as she returned from her walk, she found a small package on the porch, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside was a handmade card, the kind only a child could make, covered in glitter and uneven hearts. "Dear Grandma," it read in Lily's careful handwriting. "We miss you. Why aren't you coming for Christmas? Love, Lily and Max." A seashell necklace, much like the one Max had made years ago, was taped to the card, its edges rough but polished by the sea. Eleanor's breath caught, tears blurring her vision. The kids didn't know. Of course they didn't. Sarah and Daniel hadn't told them the truth, and the realization hit her like a wave. She sat on the porch steps, clutching the card, and let herself cry for the kids, for herself, for the family they'd been. The necklace felt heavy in her hand, a tangible piece of the love she was being denied. She called Daniel that afternoon, her voice shaking but firm. "Did you know the kids sent me a card?" she asked, not waiting for pleasantries. "They're asking why I'm not coming for Christmas. They don't even know what Sarah did." Daniel's silence was telling. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "I didn't know they sent it. They must have done it on their own. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think. You didn't think." Eleanor cut in, her anger flaring. "You didn't think about what this would do to them. Or to me. You let Sarah decide. And now Lily and Max are caught in the middle." "I'm trying to fix it," Daniel said, his tone desperate. I talked to Sarah. She's willing to reconsider. Maybe you could come for New Year's instead. New Year's. Eleanor's laugh was sharp, edged with pain. You think I'm going to wait for Sarah's permission to see my own grandkids? I'm done waiting. Daniel. She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding. The card lay on the table, Lily's heart staring up at her. She wanted to call the kids, to hear their voices, but she knew Sarah would never allow it. Instead, she tucked the card and necklace into her pocket, a reminder of why she was doing this. Selling the house wasn't just about letting go. It was about standing up for herself, about refusing to be erased. Margaret called later that day with news. A young couple had made a strong offer, well above asking price. They loved the house's charm, its history, its view. They want to close quickly, Margaret said. Before Christmas, if you're ready. Eleanor hesitated, her fingers brushing the necklace in her pocket. I'm ready, she said finally, though the words felt like a lie. She wasn't ready, not really, but she couldn't keep living in limbo, holding on to a house that no longer held her family. The paperwork was signed the next day. Eleanor sat in Margaret's office, the pen heavy in her hand as she scrawled her name. Each signature felt like a cut, severing her from the past. When it was done, Margaret squeezed her hand. You're doing the right thing, she said softly. This house deserves a new story, and so do you. Eleanor nodded, but she didn't trust herself to speak. She drove back to the beach house, the sold sign now staked in the front yard. It looked out of place, like a wound against the weathered siding. She walked inside, the emptiness louder than ever, and sat at the kitchen table. The card from Lily and Max was still there, its glitter catching the light. She traced the words with her finger, wondering if the kids would ever forgive her. That night, she dreamed of the beach house as it had been, filled with laughter. The kids running through the halls, Tom's voice calling her to dinner. She woke with tears on her cheeks, the dream so vivid it felt like a betrayal. The house was gone, or would be soon, and she was left to figure out what came next. The next morning, she started packing in earnest. She kept only what mattered, the photo albums, Tom's hat, the kids' drawings, the rest furniture, decorations, the odds and ends of a lifetime she donated or left for the new owners. It was freeing, in a way, to let go of the weight of things. But it was also terrifying. Without the house, without her family, who was she? As she packed, her phone buzzed with a voicemail from Daniel. She played it, bracing herself. Mom. His voice crackled, thick with emotion. I told Sarah we need to change things. I want the kids to see you. I don't care what it takes. Please, don't give up on us. Eleanor listened, her heart twisting. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been broken. She didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the beach, the necklace in her pocket, and stood at the water's edge. The waves were calm today, a rare stillness that felt like a gift. She didn't know if she could forgive Daniel, or if Sarah would ever soften. But she knew one thing, she wasn't giving up. Not on the kids. Not on herself. The closing date loomed, just days away, and Eleanor spent her final moments in the beach house saying goodbye. She walked through each room, her fingers brushing the walls, as if she could carry their warmth with her. The kids' bedroom was the hardest. She stood in the doorway, picturing Lily reading on the top bunk, Max sprawled on the floor with his toy cars. The emptiness was unbearable, but she forced herself to face it. This was her choice, her way of reclaiming her life. Outside, the weather had turned colder, the sky a heavy gray that promised snow. Eleanor bundled up and walked to the fire pit, where she'd spent so many nights with her family. She lit a small fire, the flames struggling against the wind, and sat on the old bench, pulling her shawl tight. The card from Lily and Max was in her pocket, a talisman against the loneliness. She hadn't responded to Daniel's voicemail, unsure of what to say. Part of her wanted to run to him, to mend things, but another part, the part that had been hurt too long, held back. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. She looked up, expecting Margaret, but it was Daniel's SUV. Her heart stuttered as he stepped out, followed by Lily and Max, their faces bright with excitement. They ran to her, their small bodies crashing into her arms. And for a moment, nothing else mattered. "Grandma," Lily squealed, her arms tight around Eleanor's waist. "We missed you." Max held up a drawing, his grin wide. "I made this for you. It's the beach house." Eleanor knelt, pulling them close, her eyes stinging. She looked up at Daniel, who stood a few steps back, his expression a mix of hope and fear. "I didn't know you were coming," she said, her voice thick. "I couldn't wait," he said, stepping closer. "I told Sarah the kids needed to see you. She didn't like it, but I brought them anyway." Eleanor's chest tightened. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. She hugged the kids again, savoring their warmth, then stood to face Daniel. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But this doesn't fix everything." "I know," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "But it's a start." They spent the afternoon together, the kids running along the beach, collecting shells, while Eleanor and Daniel sat by the fire pit. The conversation was tentative, full of pauses, but it was honest. Daniel admitted he'd been weak, letting Sarah's fears dictate their family. He promised to do better, to make sure the kids stayed in Eleanor's life. She listened, wanting to believe him, but the hurt lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lily and Max begged to stay the night. Eleanor hesitated, knowing the house was no longer hers. But Daniel nodded. "One last night," he said, "for them." They built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told stories, the way they used to. Eleanor watched the kids' faces glow in the firelight, their laughter a balm to her wounded heart. But when they fell asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket, she turned to Daniel. "I'm still selling the house," she said quietly. "Not because I'm angry, but because I need to move forward. This place, it's too full of what was." Daniel nodded, his eyes sad but understanding. "I get it. I just wish it didn't have to be this way." "Me too," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, she drove them to the ferry, her heart heavy but full. The kids hugged her fiercely, promising to call, and Daniel lingered, his hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Mom," he said. "I promise." She watched them go, the ferry disappearing into the mist, and returned to the house alone. The closing was tomorrow, and she had one final night to pack. As she worked, she found an old journal of Tom's, tucked away in a drawer. His handwriting filled the pages, stories of their life here, his love for her and Daniel and the sea. She read until dawn, tears and laughter mixing, and felt a quiet strength settle over her. She wasn't just letting go of the house. She was letting go of the pain that had held her back. The buyers arrived the next day, a young couple with a toddler, their eyes bright with excitement. Eleanor handed over the keys, her smile genuine despite the ache. "Take care of it," she said. "It's a good house." As she drove away, the beach house shrinking in her rearview mirror, Eleanor felt a weight lift. She didn't know where she was going not yet, but she knew she was ready to find out. Eleanor rented a small apartment in town, a temporary space with a view of the harbor. It was simple, with bare walls and a single window, but it felt like a fresh start. She unpacked only the essentials, her clothes, Tom's journal, the kid's card and necklace. The rest of her life was in storage, waiting for her to decide what came next. For the first time in years, she felt unmoored. But there was freedom in that. A chance to redefine herself beyond the roles of mother, grandmother, keeper of the beach house. She spent her days exploring the town, walking the cobblestone streets, stopping at the bookstore or the cafe. She joined Margaret's book club, finding solace in the lively debates and shared stories. But the absence of Lily and Max was a constant ache, a reminder of the family she was still fighting to hold on to. Daniel called regularly now, updating her on the kids, promising visits. Sarah remained a shadow in these conversations, her name mentioned cautiously, as if testing the air. Eleanor didn't push, but she didn't forgive either. Trust would take time. One evening, as she sat by her window watching the boats bob in the harbor, her phone rang. It was Lily, her voice bright and breathless. "Grandma, we're coming to see you. Dad says we can spend a whole weekend." Eleanor's heart leapt. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said, her voice catching. "I can't wait." The weekend arrived with a flurry of excitement. Daniel brought the kids to the apartment, their arms full of drawings and stories. Eleanor had baked cookies chocolate chip, Max's favorite, and set up a small table for crafts. The apartment, so quiet before, came alive with their laughter. Lily told her about school. Max showed off a new toy car. And for a few hours, it felt like the beach house days, when love was simple and unquestioned. Daniel lingered after the kids went to bed, sitting with Eleanor at the kitchen table. "Sarah's trying," he said, his voice low. "She knows she overstepped. She's just scared of losing control." Eleanor nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her mug. "I understand being scared," she said, "but shutting me out wasn't the answer. The kids need me, Daniel, and I need them." "I know," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm making sure it doesn't happen again." She wanted to believe him, but the memory of the Christmas letter lingered. Still, seeing the kids, feeling their love, was enough for now. She hugged Daniel before he left, a tentative gesture, but a step toward healing. The weeks turned into months, and Eleanor settled into her new life. She started volunteering at the local library, reading to children, sharing the stories she'd once told Lily and Max. It wasn't the same, but it filled a void, giving her purpose. She began writing, too, filling pages with memories of the beach house, of Tom, of the family they'd built. It was her way of holding on to the past without letting it define her. One day, Margaret called with unexpected news. The buyers had found an old photo album in the attic, one Eleanor had missed. "They want you to have it," Margaret said. "Can I bring it over?" When Margaret arrived, Eleanor opened the album, her breath catching. It was from the early years, when Daniel was a boy, running through the sand with Tom. There were photos of her, too, younger and laughing, her hair dark and wild. She turned the pages, each one a reminder of the life she'd lived, the love she'd poured into that house. "Thank you," she told Margaret, her voice thick. "This means more than you know." That night, she wrote a letter to Lily and Max, telling them about the album, about their father as a boy, about the beach house in its prime. She promised to show it to them one day, when they were older, when they could understand the weight of its stories. She didn't know if they'd ever return to that beach, but she knew she'd carry it with her, in her heart, in her words. As spring approached, Eleanor began looking for a new home, something small but hers. She didn't need a big house anymore, just a place to call home, to welcome the kids when they visited. She was learning to live for herself, to find joy in the small moments, a sunrise over the harbor, a child's laughter at the library, a call from Daniel that didn't end in tears. By summer, Eleanor had found a cottage on the edge of town, a cozy place with a garden and a view of the sea. It wasn't the beach house, but it was hers, a blank canvas for new memories. She painted the walls a soft blue, hung photos of Lily and Max, and set Tom's journal on a shelf by the window. The kids visited often now, their weekends filled with baking, gardening, and stories. Sarah remained distant, but she'd softened, allowing the visits without protest. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One afternoon, as Eleanor and the kids planted sunflowers in the garden, Lily looked up, her face serious. "Grandma, why did you sell the beach house? I loved it there." Eleanor paused, her hands in the dirt, and chose her words carefully. "I loved it too, sweetheart," she said. "But sometimes, we have to let go of things to make room for something new. This cottage, this garden, it's our new place to make memories." Lily nodded, her eyes thoughtful, and Max chimed in. "Can we have a fire pit here, like at the beach?" Eleanor laughed, ruffling his hair. "We'll see, Max. We'll see." That evening, Daniel joined them for dinner, a rare family gathering that felt almost normal. They ate on the porch, the air warm with summer, and talked about small things, school, books, the sunflowers that would bloom by fall. Eleanor watched them, her heart full but cautious. She'd learned not to take these moments for granted, to savor them without expecting them to last. After the kids went to bed, Daniel stayed, helping her clean up. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "For starting over. For not giving up." Eleanor smiled, her eyes on the horizon. "I had to," she said. "For me. For the kids. For us." He nodded, and for the first time in years, they hugged without hesitation, a real embrace that carried the weight of their shared past and a hope for the future. When he left, Eleanor stood on the porch, the stars bright above her. She thought of the beach house, now someone else's home, and felt a pang but no regret. It had been her anchor, but it had also been her cage. Letting it go had freed her to build something new, not just a home, but a life. She wrote in her journal that night, the words flowing easily. She wrote about the beach house, about the pain of losing it, about the joy of finding herself. She wrote about Lily and Max, about Daniel's efforts to rebuild, about the fragile hope of reconciliation. And she wrote about the cottage, her new beginning, where the sea was still close, but the weight of the past was lighter. Months later, at Christmas, Eleanor hosted a small gathering at the cottage. Daniel came with the kids, and Sarah, to Eleanor's surprise, joined them. It was awkward at first, the air thick with unspoken history, but the kids' laughter broke the tension. They decorated a tiny tree, hung stockings, and roasted marshmallows in the garden, a nod to the beach house days. Sarah didn't say much, but she smiled when Max showed her his new seashell collection, and Eleanor saw a flicker of possibility. As the night ended, Lily hugged her tightly. "This is our new beach house, isn't it, Grandma?" Eleanor kissed her forehead, her heart full. "It's better," she said. "It's home." She stood at the door, watching them drive away, the cottage warm behind her. The ocean whispered in the distance, a reminder of what was and what could be. Eleanor had lost the beach house, but she'd gained something more, herself, her strength, her story. And in that, she found peace.